So your hosts, as I said, I'm Stu McKenzie, Director of Migration Ecology with Birds Canada. Lisa Kuziuk and Allison Fetterman have also been important in helping to coordinate this, as well as Matt Webb. Matt's unfortunate, he can't be here today. And then you'll also have one of our moderators is Andres Jimenez, who's our urban bird coordinator. So next. Oh, sorry, and I forgot to acknowledge our interpreters, Marina, Pauline, and Arturo. So thank you very much for them. In terms of acknowledgements, I thank special big thanks to all of our panelists. It's not a simple job we asked them to do. And our intent here today is not to provide a summary of every project that ever was. The intent is to provide a high-level overview of what's happened everywhere, and the players involved, organizations, communications, and the structure. Inevitably, we're going to leave someone out, or a project, or a result, and for that, I apologize on behalf of everybody involved. And I want to thank all the registrants that are with us today and all of the Modus champions as well. And on behalf of all the presenters, we'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples around the world for sharing the lands where all of our work is conducted. Next. So who is Modus? Well, Modus, it's a big team. So at Birds Canada, Modus is a program of Birds Canada, and Birds Canada is a non-profit organization in Canada focused on the conservation of birds and their habitats. There's about 10 staff that work, not all full-time on Modus. And we also have a lot of partnerships with various organizations to deliver various objectives, and a Modus advisory committee that oversees what we're doing at a high level on an advisory capacity. And there's a lot of large funders that contribute to the network behind the scenes that none of our collaborators would necessarily know are critical to their work. That includes the Government of Canada, Canada Foundation for Innovation, Canary, and the Weston Family Foundation. And we also want to acknowledge the substantial technological contributions of low-tech and cellular tracking technologies. Next. But most importantly, Modus is you. It's everybody, and that's one of the beautiful things about Modus, but it also makes it incredibly difficult to manage. Next. So the what is Modus? We're going to assume that everybody here knows the basics. Modus is an international collaborative research network that uses coordinated automated radio telemetry to facilitate the research and education on the ecology and conservation of migratory animals. Next. It's not all just about tracks and where birds go. Modus, or the technology behind it, also allows for us to make inferences onto specific behaviors or events in birds' lives. Next. And when we combine that all, we get a lot of data, and it's important that the individual contributions of any one project or collaborator can't be understated. But it's important that we realize that they're our results. It's all of our data, and that's incredibly unique with respect to Modus. Next. Now, we've come a long way from a whiteboard in Western University. That's the first time where we kind of came up with the Modus name. And from the outset, the philosophy behind Modus has been to harness the collective power of individual researchers, groups, and organizations into one massive coordinated effort that can expand the scale and scope and impact of everybody's work, and importantly, to optimize scarce research dollars. The growth of Modus to date has largely been organically driven by the priorities and partners, rather than under a unifying strategy or a vision about what Modus could be and do. To date, our vision has been more implicit rather than explicit, working together toward a common goal, but without strategic objectives. Numerous partners have made large strategic investments to support the development of the network, but those have been comparatively small in scale when compared to what a collective contributions have been, or what a coordinated effort might look like. So to this end, we're looking to assemble Modus collaborators, why we're all here today, in a series of workshops over the next year to discuss those opportunities, challenges, and objectives as we plot our next decade of progress. Next. But there's a lot to Modus. There's animals and the methods we use. There's complex infrastructure, education, whole technology background, all the projects and collaborators, and then the conservation and data science that goes into it that is varied as well. Next. So our workshops, starting with this one, we figured the best way to start is just to get the family together to talk at a high level and bring everybody up to speed on the status of the network and put us all on the same page. Over the next year, we'll be tackling different subjects in 1 or 2 follow-up workshops that people can join as they see fit. And we look forward to your participation with any of these as we move forward. Next. The agenda today will carry on sort of presentation by presentation. We'll try and maintain a pretty tight ship here, and there will be a break midway through. So the format is an 8 to 10 minute presentation, followed by 2 to 3 minutes for Q&A. Please keep questions to the Q&A, and Andre and I will address 1 or 2 questions if we can, bring them to the panel for discussion, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. So without further ado, thank you all for attending and paying attention, and we will move on to our first presenter next. Sorry if I was going too fast for anybody or the interpreters. So first up is Heiko Schmaljohan, who's going to be introducing the European part of the Motus family. And Heiko, as soon as your presentation is queued up, you're free to go.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stu. So will it be sort of in the presentation mode or like this?
Yeah, I seem to have a little delay loading, so it is. I apologize for this.
Just treat it as a breather.
Yeah, Heiko, you can introduce yourself in the meantime, maybe.
Yeah, I can do. So yeah, welcome all to talk about the European part of the Motus family, and I would like to highlight that I give this talk on behalf of all the European Motus users, right? And on my second slide, I'm going to introduce myself, but I can do this also without the slide. So I'm Heiko Schmaljohan, and currently I work at the University of Oldenburg, and I'm also work at the Institute of Avian Research, and I'm a member of the advisory committee, and actually focus on songbird migration. And I usually do this with the northern wheat, which is a lovely bird species, which you were supposed to see now, but at least as you already showed it before. So it's this lovely colored bird with a gray back and this sort of black mask on the face. And I study migration mainly on Helgoland, but I also have started to study breeding ecology of the northern wheat breeding on Norderney, which is a small island in the German Bight. And we installed the first stations in March 2015 on Helgoland, and this is when it all started. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. So next. And next, I talked about that already. All right, so now I say a few words about the different projects that we have in Europe. And I'm going to start with the United Kingdom. And there are many different projects on sort of related topics. It's on the migration of European blackcaps and Orthiceus pipistrelle and also other bat species. And here we have 4 most important players. This is Lucy Mitchell, Evan Parsons, Fiona Matthews, and Sander Lagerfeld, and different universities are involved, but also, and that's very important, the British Trust for Ornithology and the Bird Observatories Council. Next. Then we move on to the Netherlands, and there's a large-scale project going on with many, many people involved. It's on bat and bird migration and habitat use in relation to wind energy. And here Sander Lagerfeld pulls all the strings, but there are also very other important persons there as well, like Bart Noor and Rene Janssen, and many, many more people. And you can also see that many different organizations and institutes and the Wageningen University and Research are involved. Okay, next. And there's another project run by Bob Purring, also in the Netherlands, on long distance migration of bats in the Baltic North Sea region. And then next again. Yeah, and then another project in the Netherlands. They're very productive in the Netherlands, actually. And this project is led by Barbara Helm and her group, and she studies chronotypes of songbirds during the breeding season. So it's not really related to migration. And she works together with Aurelia Strauss and Rene Janssen, and there you can already see the collaboration within the Motus system already within the Netherlands. Okay, next. Now we jump to Germany, and here the working group of Homo hip hop, they study the potential effects of offshore wind parks on songbird migration over the North Sea. And most work is here done by Vera Brust and Florian Packmo and also Mario de Neidels. And then next. A few words about my own project. It's mainly on migration and stopover ecology and migrant songbirds, also including pre-migratory flights. And I do this with a team, including Timo Karwinkel, Zafet Süß, and also Mario de Neidels. Okay, next. Now we jump to the north a bit, and there's a huge and very productive group studying the migration ecology and departure decisions of birds and also bats in Scandinavia. There are many people involved. I just mentioned the two important ones. This is on the one hand Magnus Hellström from the Ottenby Bird Observatory, and then Susanne Åkesson from the Lund University. Okay, next. And next to Sweden is actually Norway, and luckily Vidar Christiansen has a project there on the songbird migration behavior along the southeastern coastline of Norway. Okay, next. And in Russia, there's a project on the Baltic Sea coastline from Dmitry Kinchkinev and Andrei Mukin on the migration of reed warblers and bats and also dragonflies. And Dmitry comes from the Kiel University in UK, and Andrei is the director of the biological station in Rybachy. So many, many more people are of course involved in this. And Ivar Magini, he has a project on the stopover physiology in migrant songbirds around the Lake Neusiedl. This is in eastern part of Austria. And the next.
Oh, we lost him. We'll give Heiko 1 minute to, there you are. You're back with us, Heiko?
Yeah, next.
Okay. You froze for a second, so.
Oh, did I? All right, okay.
After Hungary, carry on.
All right, so a few words about the regional organizational structure. Well, we do not have a really clear structure yet. There's no hierarchy, but at least we have a very uncomplicated way of communicating with each other. So the whole structure in Europe is actually project-based at the moment. But we do, of course, collaborate on specific topics. Just as I said, it's on bird and bat migration across the North Sea. And then next. And the whole system spans from north to south about 3,500 kilometers and from east to west about 1,500 kilometers. But since we have only about 130 receiving stations, the area is not very dense yet, and we just have a few portable receivers. And next. But we do collaborate, I indicated this before, and there's a new project actually on the causes and consequences of vagrancy, and we study here the yellow-browed warbler with many different researchers and organizations across all of Europe. It's not only related to the Motus system, but of course we use the Motus system to identify the migration routes of this small songbird. Okay, next. About the funding. So far, we just have single project-related funding. And at the moment, we just can extend the national coverage of the radio receiving system through these kind of single projects. But of course, in the long run, we would like to have some kind of long-term funding, and we're just looking for these kind of opportunities. Next. Well, we have many different plans. I can't list them all, but one is, of course, to install more stations at the critical bottleneck sites, as you can indicate it here, which is, of course, especially important for bird migration. Next. But we also have a lot of barriers, I must admit, and the very important one is actually the animal welfare permits, or getting them. It's getting more and more tricky to get these animal welfare permits here in Europe. This really is complicated. And the other issue is the frequency. So currently all tags run on 150.1 megahertz, but it's at the moment totally unclear whether this frequency can be also used in the UK and Morocco in the future. So this is going to be a problem. And especially for smaller groups, we actually have the problem that for some it's not so easy to pay the Motus fee. I know that there are waivers. And we are just at the beginning of enlarging the whole network, right? So in comparison to other continents, you could say that we get sort of less data per money, so to say. It's not a critic, but it's just as it is at the moment. Okay, next. All right, what's the plan, dream, wish? There are, of course, many. And one thing that we discussed in our group is that it would be great to get an update of the sensor gnome receiver, because at the moment, as far as I know, we cannot use the latest RPI models in the receivers. Next. And if possible in the future, it would be really cool to add sort of an alerting function to the receiver so that the users are actually instantaneously informed if it stops working. Next. And in Europe, we sometimes have the problem that the frequency data is processed as 166 megahertz, but of course we usually run on 151 megahertz. This is sometimes a problem, but always nicely solved by Motus. Next. And we also discussed whether it would be possible and sensible to actually make the whole data processing code and function public, and that it would be also possible to refer to a specific version of the software also in terms of publications, so that everybody knows how the data was actually processed. Next. And it would be, of course, dream to get automated location estimates when simultaneous recordings of the same tag from more than one station were available. Next. And I know that this is technically possible, but I'm not quite sure whether this has been done yet. It would be great to, in the future, talk about recording physiological parameters like heart rate and ring beat as well, and getting this data through the Motus system. Okay, next. Well, we all from Europe would like to thank the entire Motus team for the constant support, help, and further development of this truly wonderful system. Next. And we would like to thank all who have contributed to the European Motus system as it is now in one way or the other. So thanks a lot for all the contributors, for all the people who have helped us with setting up this whole system. And the next, are there any questions?
Great, thank you very much, Heiko. That was excellent, and excellent feedback as well. And we won't have time to follow up on all of that now, but we will in due course. There is one question, and I think we'll have time for this one, and then we'll see if anything else comes in. And it comes from Peter Dratch. And so given the tracking relative to wind development, has there been any significant support by governments and the EU?
Yeah, there have been support by the German government, and I guess also by the Dutch government. I'm not quite sure about the Netherlands system, but here in Germany, the system installed by Omo Hip-Hop and his group and Vera Brust along the coast of Schleswig-Holstein and Lower Saxony, the two federal states, they were actually funded by the Federal Agency for Conservation. So there is support from this direction, yes.
Great. And then the other question is, are most tags UHF, which is 434 megahertz, or VHF, which is the 151? And I'll answer that. That most of the projects there are working on VHF, so 151.
Yeah, that's true.
And just because I have a couple minutes, I will address some of your suggestions with respect to the sensor gnome software. And we are working on an update that addresses all of your concerns, but it's as you know, it's not quite as simple
I know.
As it may seem. So there's, and I think that'll be it. And we'll probably do a transition now into the next presentation. And thank you all. Thank you very much, Heiko, and everybody in Europe. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I had a lot of support, so I have to give this thanks forward to all the other people in the European family. Thank you so much, Stu.
Alrighty, next up, it is my great pleasure, as soon as I get Christian's video up here. Thanks, Andres. To introduce Christian Fries, who's going to talk to us about Modus in the North. So whenever you're ready, Christian, take it away.
Thanks, Stu. And Heiko, talk about a cool bit of work you guys have going on over in Europe. That's really exciting to see. Thanks very much for sharing. I am really happy to be here. My name is Christian Fries. I'm with the Canadian Wildlife Service out of Ontario region, and I'm representing what we're calling the North. And so a lot of the projects that are being presented here, I am just the messenger, and anything I get incorrect is my fault, and the project successes are all theirs. Next slide, please. There's obviously, when we're talking about the North, and I'll get into where we're going, where the North is, quote unquote, in a second here, but I just wanted to highlight quickly the number of collaborators that have been involved in the various projects across the north of Canada, and the number of different funders. You can see just on this slide is a snapshot of some of those really key contributors and partnerships that we have. Next slide, please. For the most part, people involved, or the agencies involved with the North in Canada, are government agencies and academia. We have some strong partnerships with Indigenous communities in parts of Northern Canada. And yeah, like I said, a lot of government agencies are sort of driving the bus on getting projects initiated, and it's a bit of a piecemeal effort at the moment. The North is a very complicated, next slide, please. The North is a very complicated region to access. It's extremely remote. Most of the locations that are I'll highlight here today are accessed in the winter by a snow machine or by helicopter or aircraft in the summertime. It's the Arctic is a vast landscape.
En hiver, il faut y aller par moto.
And the infrastructure that's available for transportation across this region is limited. So it can be very expensive to get people up into the North to get projects on the ground. It's expensive to maintain the towers, and those towers are often only visited 1 or 2 times during a season, if you're lucky to get them set up and get data off before things close up for the end of the year. A lot of the work that's being conducted at the moment is focused on shorebird taxa, and so we have the groups that are working in the North on shorebirds have a really good collaboration, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. Next slide, please. So what is the North? Well, for the purposes of this regional workshop, we decided that we'd focus on sort of northern Canada, the high Arctic down into Hudson Bay, James Bay, and also focus on the St. Lawrence Seaway in Quebec. And that's related to the focus of shorebird work there, so that we kind of grouped the projects together on a shorebird basis. On the left-hand side, you can see all the different locations and the people involved. I'm going to get into each of these in the coming slides. Next slide, please. So we'll start off in the high Arctic, and Jenny Rausch and Paul Woodard out of our Northwest Territories office in CWS Northern, they had a tower operating out of what is called Nanuit Italinga, which is formerly the Polar Bear Pass National Wildlife Area. It's still a national wildlife area. There were over 140 tags put out across this area, about 114 tags, I should say, 6 shorebird species were tagged across this monitoring program that is primarily a focus on demographics, and includes some intensive nest monitoring, banding, and tagging, among other tasks and initiatives. Outside of this specific site, you can see the one tower at the sort of in the middle of nowhere, kind of. There were 84 of these tags were detected outside of that home area where they were tagged initially. Plans for this group, for Jenny and Paul, include a rotational 5-year interval. So the plan is to be back at Nanuit Italinga in 2027. And in this coming season, there's going to be 2 receivers set up in Darling Lake and 1 near Yellowknife, which are just outside of the view of that slide in the far bottom left-hand side. Anyway, really cool stuff these guys are getting up to, and some really interesting things coming out of it. Next slide, please. So as we move a little bit south from the high Arctic, we get into East Bay and Coates Island, and Paul Smith is leading a group of researchers and a number of different projects that are lumped under what is Project 40, the Arctic Shorebirds project. So this includes collaborators within Ontario and Manitoba in Canada. And it's another shorebird focus, looking at breeding ecology and migration. From what I understand, Paul has had conversations with local hunters and trappers associations. And there's some interest in expanding the network and having folks within Nunavut host towers. But one thing that would be, I think, really important in this landscape is to have local trapping efforts that would maintain the interest of those local community members. If there's no tags being picked up on the towers, the interest could wane from those, and that could be to the detriment of the effort. At any rate, because of COVID, a lot of this has been shut down for the last 2 seasons, but there will be continued work ongoing out of these 2 locations. They're long-term monitoring sites from the Wildlife Research Division of Environment and Climate Change Canada. Next slide, please. Now moving further south and a bit to the west, we get into Churchill, which is in northern Manitoba on the Hudson Bay coast. Dr. Eric Knoll at Trent University leads a research group out of there, and they've had a range of towers, up to 7, annually operated out of this location, and again is focusing on shorebird migration ecology. A number of strong graduate students have come out of Erica's lab that have done some really significant work, and I should mention the same with Paul's lab and his work in Coates Island and East Bay. Really interesting stuff coming from students asking very specific questions about shorebird monitoring or shorebird ecology and staging. I just want to make sure I got everything covered. Yes, so as far as I know, the plan is to continue field operations out of the Churchill Northern Studies Center in the future. I think COVID has shut down a lot of the work that was going on there, unfortunately. Anyhow, next slide, please. Moving a little bit south from Churchill, we get into Wapoosk National Park, and this is I'm excited to say, a new member to the Modus family, Matt Webb at Parks Canada, setting up hopefully up to 7 towers by 2022. They're hoping to have 2 towers up in this season, I should say. Sorry, getting distracted with all the chat coming through. So access for these sites is again snowmobile and helicopter, and they're developing plans for tagging, and with the hope of a long-term monitoring project that will help fill some of the knowledge gaps. There's critical habitat for red knot, which is an endangered species in Canada, and so trying to understand a bit better the habitat use and needs of that species within the national park. Next slide, please. Just to the southeast of Wapoosk, you can see the Nelson River. Ann McKellar out of CWS Prairie region set up a tower out of a lodge, Churchill Wild, that operates this tower for Canadian Wildlife Service. The tower was set up in 2014 when, after geolocator data discovered that red knots seem to use this region in the spring, which was new to a lot of people. And so trying to understand how long birds spent there, what sort of the use of the habitat was. So that was sort of the impetus for the station. It's a passive station, and because of intermittent power and certain things like that, there's some aging infrastructure that could be replaced, or there's some uncertainty for the long term of this of the operation of this tower. But for this coming season, the plan is to have it online later in the summer, which is great news because this spot is it's a beauty. Next slide, please. All right, moving into the Ontario side of Hudson Bay and into James Bay, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry operates a shorebird and goose research, or it's a wildlife research camp that has multiple questions, and part of those questions are related to shorebirds, and that's the focus of the Modus work that's going on within Burnt Point, which is at the top, and Gamskia's Island down the bottom of the slide is more of a passive station, and it's also in Nunavut, interestingly. Burnt Point, there's been intensive nest monitoring and banding. Whimbrel seems to be the most commonly banded bird there, and there's some interesting stuff coming out of the tagging operations from these folks there. So Rod Brook and Kim Bennett out of M&R are leading that charge. Next slide, please. Right on. So now moving into James Bay, this is the work that I'm involved in or have been involved in. It's on the southwest side within the homelands of the Moose Cree First Nation. It's a multi-partner project, significant collaboration with all of the agencies listed at the top. In addition, there's Northern Lights Secondary School in Moosonee hosts a tower that's coordinated by Birds Canada. And that tower is really interesting because it's garnered a lot of interest from the local community and especially the kids out of the high school because they get to see it live when we were tagging birds out of James Bay. Because of COVID, we have not been able to get those towers and set them up this past 2 seasons. The hope is to have those towers erected next spring so we can catch some northbound birds. I also want to work with local communities to understand what their questions are related to habitat use for tagged wildlife within the regions and potentially expand the network to the north up towards Gamsky Island, just to get a bit more coverage along that southwestern shore of James Bay, which is one of the hemispheric important spots for staging shorebirds in the south or on their southbound migration. Next slide, please. Moving on to the Quebec side is the EU Marine Region, and the Cree Trappers Association and all the collaborators listed at the top set up a number of these towers here, and with the idea of tracking passively the tags that were coming out of where we were putting tags out on the west side of southwestern James Bay, in addition to catching northbound and some of the northern tagging shorebirds out of that region. These towers have picked up a number of different interesting species, and Bahia Lomas is quite a distance from James Bay. Pretty neat stuff. Next slide, please. All right, now moving into Quebec and the St. Lawrence Seaway. Yves Aubry out of CWS Quebec region is leading this project. Started up in 2014 and within the Mingan Archipelago, which is a national park on the north shore of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and focusing on semi-palmated sandpipers and red knot, trapping and monitoring. Next slide, please. And so I think there are over 700 shorebirds that have been banded, and as I mentioned, red knot and semi are the primary focus on the Mingan Archipelago. Next slide. On the south shore, there has also been a partnership with Cégep I'm going to say this incorrectly, and I apologize. Cégep de la Pocatière in the Kamouraska region, and this site had a focus on semi-palmated sandpipers. Interestingly, James Bay and Mingan seem to be the two main exit points for red knots out of Canada, with about half of the Rufa population stopping over within that region of the country, which is bananas. I just wanted to highlight an interesting, some of this, what I find really great about the Modus collaboration and the partnerships and the work that goes on with this group is the information that can be derived from what amounts to essentially a ping off of a tower. So Junus and colleagues found and utilized all of the shorebird tagging data that had been collected between 2014 and 2016. You can see the sample size on the left-hand side, and found some really interesting stuff related to shorebird migration movements. And that birds are flying faster in spring, but they have a higher airspeed in fall. So they're taking advantage of wind on their migratory movements. And this was quantified with some fancy math. And what also is interesting is the relationship between their movements and predator movements, so raptors. So birds that were moving had a faster airspeed leading up to the migration of raptors. Afterward, they had a similar airspeed to those birds migrating north in the spring. Pretty neat stuff. Next slide. I hope I'm not stealing the thunder of the Northeast group here, but it's just another really exciting use of the data, some novel analytic techniques to discover and understand height in space and time, and where birds move to inform policy development. Some pretty heavy hitting stuff. It's really great to see, and this comes out of Modus data. Next slide. All right, so let's wrap this up here. Within the region, the north, quote unquote, it's primarily project based. I think there is going to be a need for some more enhanced community engagement, and this has been sort of frustrated because of for the past couple of years because of COVID, but also just because of the vast landscape that we're dealing with and the number of different communities that are important to communicate with about expanding any Modus infrastructure. And I think, as I mentioned before, I think a key question that we need to know is what are the needs of those local communities and what are the questions they have that Modus can help to answer. Next slide. The funding we've had, as I mentioned, is largely from government and large grants. There are private donations as well. In order to maintain a lot of the infrastructure, and as I mentioned, it's very costly to get to these locations. Ongoing funding is going to be, there's no question, it's a requirement. Long-term sustainability is dependent on the continued funding, obviously. And I think, as I noted with that Paul had mentioned to me, that local tagging efforts will be integral to the success of any expansion, so that it maintains an interest with the local communities who are hosting any towers. Next slide. Right, and I guess I'll end there with questions. And Allison, if you don't mind flipping it to the next slide, it just has all the funders and project logos and stuff, just so people can see it if there are any questions.
Great,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Sorry for the distracting chat.
All good. I'm easily distracted. I'm like a cat.
The chat's tough. Will mention that the agenda is posted in the chat if you'd like to look for it, and I'll post a link there as well so you can check on it if you'd like to go. We're going to just carry right on into the next video at this point, and so thank you very much, Christian. It's great to get a.
Yeah, sorry, going over time, y'all.
No, that's quite all right. And this is a video, so hopefully it all goes through okay. So Matt wasn't able to.
Hi, my name is Matt Webb. I'm an avian ecologist with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies based in Colorado. I want to talk to you about Modus efforts going on throughout the western half of North America. I'll start with a little bit about myself. I've been working with Modus in some capacity for the better part of the last 6 years, and I cut my teeth in the northeastern United States working for Powder Mill Nature Reserve, which is part of the Northeastern Modus collaboration that Scott Weidensall will be presenting about soon. I'll stop my video here and I'll keep going with the presentation. Like I said, I want to talk about efforts going on throughout the West, the western half of North America. As you can see from these logos, there's lots of organizations and agencies and individuals, universities, all involved in Modus work throughout this region. And a lot of our research and a lot of our work expands outside of the scope of this box in particular. A lot of us research the full annual cycle of the birds that we're studying. And so a lot of us have an international component as well, but I'll stay within this box for the purposes of this presentation. I want to start by highlighting the work of Mary Whitfield, the director of the Southern Sierra Research Station. Her project, her Modus project number 247, is specifically studying an endemic species to the state of California, the tricolored blackbird. But beyond her research with Modus, she has been very instrumental in the growth of Modus throughout the western half of really of the continent and even down into South America as well. She was instrumental in getting Modus to become an initiative within Partners in Flight's Western Working Group. In 2018, she published this prospectus for Modus in the western half of the continent. And this prospectus kind of gives background about what Modus is, details how Modus could be used in research going on in the West, and unique challenges or difficulties that we might face with Modus in the West here. Mary's organization also hosts Partners in Flight's collaborative planning map for Modus efforts going on throughout the West, so that individuals and organizations can visit that map to see what others are doing and what others are planning to do as well. And this initiative through Partners in Flight really has gotten lots and lots of work going in the West. And so I want to continue by highlighting some of those projects in particular that have taken place because of this initiative here. I'll start with the Intermountain West collaboration. It's a project headed up by William Blake from MPG Ranch in concert with lots of others, including Klamath Bird Observatory, Intermountain Bird Observatory, and numerous universities and other institutions within the Pacific Northwest. Beyond the research that MPG Ranch does using Modus, William has become a really great resource for people to reach out to learn about Modus, and he has even helped out with the installation on several Modus stations outside of the reach of his research, stations within Oregon, California, and Wyoming. If you want to read more about what MPG Ranch is doing with Modus, you can check out their website, mpgranch.com, and learn about the cool things they're doing with species such as common nighthawks and Lewis's woodpeckers. Then we'll move up into Canada in the western part for the Western Canada projects. Amy McDonald, Kira Delmore, Wendy Easton, and multiple others from Environment and Climate Change Canada are using Modus in that region to study the movement of Swainson's thrushes and shorebirds that use the Pacific coast and kind of Intermountain West regions. Here's some contact information for Amy, Wendy, and Kira if you'd like to reach out to them for very specific information about their individual projects. We'll move a little bit to the east from there to Saskatchewan and Manitoba to highlight the work that Christy Morrissey and others are doing. Christy's from the University of Saskatchewan, and she's researching the full annual cycle movement of shorebirds such as sanderling and red knots. And her work expands Modus and Modus infrastructure down into South America with stations in Peru and Chile. Others within that region are also researching localized and regional movement of swallow species, such as this tree swallow you see here. These other pictures are some of Christy and her researchers' photographs of sanderlings with Modus tags on them. We'll move south from there to talk about my project here from Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. We are expanding Modus across the Great Plains and Chihuahuan Desert, so sort of the easternmost part of the West here. And our specific interests are grassland birds and researching the full annual cycle of grassland birds. There's many knowledge gaps that exist within the understanding of grassland birds, specifically within migration. And so we're hoping to fill in some of those gaps using Modus here. We've got a Google Groups that you can join. There's the link down there at the bottom for more information about the Great Plains and Chihuahuan Desert Modus project as a whole. In the northern Great Plains within this region, there's several organizations and individuals doing research on the breeding range of these grassland birds, including Andy Boyce from Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center and Scott Summershoe from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in partnership with the state of Montana and others such as Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as us here from Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. And then in the southern portion of this region, there's a lot of wintering movement research going on. One in particular is this project that consists of 13 really tightly placed stations within the panhandle of Texas through University of Oklahoma. Dr. Jeremy Ross and his Dust Bowl automated radio telemetry network is studying the winter movements of several species of longspurs. And then kind of zooming out a little bit, a lot of us get together every month. We have a monthly meeting where we talk about what's going on in Modus throughout the West. So lots of these people that I just mentioned, just talked about, as well as some international people. So we've got people from Mexico, Central America, and Canada participating on these calls every month. And these calls really are a place for us to discuss specific projects taking place within the West, details of those, any kind of contact information that needs to be spread around a little bit, barriers that we come up against, issues we face. And these meetings also give us an opportunity to ask sometimes very dumb, but sometimes very, very in-depth technical questions about Modus specifically. And it gives us an opportunity to learn from each other, learn from what we're all doing at the same time. This meeting takes place, like I said, once a month. And if you're interested in joining, here's my email address, and you can contact me, matt.webb@birdconservancy.org. I'll end by talking about two really cool projects and efforts going on through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The first one is some work to expand the Modus infrastructure onto the National Wildlife Refuges. This map that you see here, all these blue dots are different National Wildlife Refuge properties throughout the United States. And we are focusing on getting Modus infrastructure placed on these. We're starting here in Colorado with several stations, one in Kansas. This summer, we're gonna be placing some in Montana and Utah as well. And Scott Summershoe and Orion Richmond, whose emails are on the screen here, are the people to contact for more information about that. The last project I want to highlight is this effort by United States Fish and Wildlife Service biologists who are stationed at Department of Defense bases, such as Air Force bases, to expand Modus infrastructure onto the base itself. They're interested in doing this and talking to the base from the angle of meeting the Sykes Act requirements for that military base itself. The Sykes Act is essentially a requirement that says that military bases and reservations or properties have to plan, develop, maintain, and coordinate around the conservation of the wildlife that might be using that base. There's current efforts going on in North Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, and here in Colorado. And that's all I've got for now. I apologize for not being able to be there in person to answer questions, but here's my email address if you'd like to email me with any questions. And I'm sure there's somebody else on the call here who is from that Western coordinators group who would be happy to answer questions for you. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Matt, remotely. Matt's been busy the last 10 days setting up stations all over the place. And from the West to the Midwest, Sarah, you ready?
I'm ready, I'm always ready.
So as soon as it's queued, you can carry on whenever you're ready.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Kendrick. I work for the Missouri Department of Conservation. We're a state fish and wildlife management agency in the Midwest. I'm very humbled and honored to be here with all the Modus family from across the world. It's very exciting and it's really great. Modus is really inspired me and I love talking about it. Later in the presentation, I'm going to introduce Chris Tonra with Ohio State University to talk about how they used Modus project-wise in his lab. Next, please. So where the hell is the Midwest? So for people who are not from the United States, it's in the middle where all the birds migrate through. So we use in general the US Fish and Wildlife Service border of the 8 states that border Canada and the Great Lakes, right there in the northern middle. And also we're smack dab in the middle of the Mississippi Flyway, which is very important clearly to migration. Next, please. And we're not all just corn and soybeans, though that are many, many acres of it, but next. We also have lots of beautiful and diverse habitats, like our Great Lakes, of course, other lakes up north, our Ozark Forest, prairie wetland, and all the good things that inspire lots of bird diversity across the region. Next. So our loose organization of Modus in the entire region is through the Midwest Migration Network. It's a group, kind of like a joint venture of agencies and NGOs that are working towards different bird and sometimes bat migration efforts. I am the chair of the telemetry initiative. There are 4 initiatives through the MMN, the Midwest Migration Network. And the goal of our telemetry initiative is to broaden Modus across the region and in the neotropics, which I think is very important. Next. So we have coordinated. Chris Tonrat was actually the previous telemetry initiative chair, and he and Amber Roth, the MMN's coordinator, and the group set up a focal species list. So we have 4 tiers of focal species for the entire region, in addition to, next, coordinated research questions. So these were developed in about 2018 or so by Chris Tonra, the previous chair, who will speak in just a moment. So I won't read through all of these, but suffice to say that we have made this strong attempt at coordination across the region. But we're limited by time and someone to coordinate the region's Modus efforts full-time across the Midwest. Next. So we have developed a strategic plan for Modus across the region. It is ambitious. So all the orange dots are what we hope to, where we hope to add Modus stations. But it also, more than anything, it provides guidelines for those new to Modus in the region, gives them an idea of context, and how we'd like arrays to be laid out across the region, east-west, across states to create these digital fence arrays and along our major waterways. Next. So 2 years ago, when I learned about Modus, I would show this slide and say, we don't have any receivers in the Midwest. We need any. You can tell by the big red circle. Well, that's changed a lot over the last few years, thanks to many partners that I know I will forget to mention all of them, and concerted efforts through grants and other things to get receivers up both in Missouri and in the a lot in the northern Midwest around the Great Lakes up there. So next. So you can see here the number of stations we filled in the last 2 and 3 years. So trying to maintain those east-west lines, but really just trying to get receivers up in a lot of ways in these big gaps. Next. So we're also seeing growth in the neotropics due to our partner efforts, which Nick Bailey and Ernesto Carmen will speak to. We've had the opportunity to fold in stations in the neotropics in Midwestern grants we have applied for, which is amazing. And so the most recent ones will add 4 in Guatemala. Next. Oh, I was on the next one. Sorry, go ahead, next. You can just click through this a little bit, Allison. So the most recent ones, we will have added 15 new receivers in the neotropics via Midwestern Modus grants that we've gotten up north, which is great. And so it'll add 4 in Guatemala with ABC, 4 in the Yucatan with National Audubon, 3 in Costa Rica with Selva and Ernesto, and 4 new in Colombia. And so those are all part of recent grants. Next. And so our funding strategy in the Midwest has been largely grant-based, but also local donations. So the US Fish and Wildlife Service Region 3 Migratory Birds Grant, we got that in 2019. It placed 12 stations in Missouri, Illinois, and also Guatemala. Again, also always trying to fold in neotropic sites as well. Next, the Fish and Wildlife Service, we just got a competitive state wildlife grant. This is the biggest one we've gotten in the region. It will place 57 new stations, 8 of them in 8 Midwestern states, nearly all of them. And then more receivers in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia with Nick and Ernesto on the call and National Audubon. And it also supports 3 research projects across the region. So it's interesting to see the other regions coordination mostly project driven. The Midwest has mostly been infrastructure driven initially. There have been a lot of infrastructuras. Chris will
Alors
talk,
que chez nous,
but we're mostly just trying to build up the infrastructure before we can do large scale projects like that. We've also gotten about $22,000 in private donations in Missouri alone from presenting to groups, Audubon chapters, private donors, and Fish and Wildlife Service Ecological Services Office. So for folks within the United States, I would ask Fish and Wildlife Service offices for end of year funding. Sometimes they're looking for funds, places to give those funds for Modus. Next, thanks. Okay, so I'm not going to go through every single station we put up, but in general, you know, Missouri, we've put up 16 stations across the state trying for 2 east-west fences, 6 more are planned, Iowa DNR, Indiana DNR, and Illinois Natural History Survey, Minnesota DNR. A lot of these state agencies are getting involved, which is great. They were partners on our CSWIG, our competitive state wildlife grant. And so they're placing big chunks of stations, 5, 8, 8, 10. In the St. Louis Zoo, they're putting up 2. You know, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums is also a good audience we may need to talk about for Modus because they're interested in expanding it with us. And then one going up around St. Louis. All of these, we try and get as closely to east-west fences as possible across the region. Next. So before we get into the project examples, we have a lot of opportunity for growth in the Midwest, clearly. It's a large area where we're starting from not scratch, but we've started from very few receivers, and we're really trying to build that up and make it a lot more robust before we put tags out across the region. So capacity is our main challenge in the Midwest. We don't have a full-time Midwest coordinator. I'm so jealous of Matt Webb's monthly phone calls. So we really need someone thinking about Modus full-time in the region. And the dream, yes, next, is a strategic, you know, or multiple strategic, hemispheric, coordinated region-wide research projects. And continued growth of the Modus network. Next, our org structure dream is that National Audubon Society and partners have applied for a Region 3 grant for a Midwest Modus coordinator to help us pull together and, you know, be technical assistance as Matt Webb is doing and help with region-wide coordination of projects. Next. So I'm just going to move here through a few slides very, very quickly. I apologize for the brevity, but to highlight a few of these really cool projects. So the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, led by Nathan Cooper and Pete Mara, they put up receivers in both the Bahamas and Michigan to look at both long distance and local tracking of Kirtland's warblers. With the local tracking, they found a surprising proportion of breeders and non-breeders that made really long distance movements during the breeding season, during the nestling stage in particular. There's a really great YouTube video called Hidden Long Distance Movements by a Migratory Bird. With a Google search, you can find it pretty easily. But it's such a great video, even to show people who don't know about Modus. It really talks about how Modus works and what their project achieved. It's really cool. Next. Okay, black tern tracking by Audubon Great Lakes. They have put up 4 stations, and they're going to and are placing 60 tags on black terns. They're tagging chicks pre-fledged to provide a more accurate measurement of fledgling success for a more robust model that they're trying to build, and filling gaps in the Modus network. So lots of partners there that I will not list out, but as we all know, every Modus project is a massive undertaking by many people. Next. Okay, so Mike Wells with the Fish and Wildlife Service has put 6 stations along the Mississippi River corridor, tagging golden-winged warblers. Golden wings are thought to concentrate in the upper Miss Valley as they migrate due to intensive agriculture, but it's never been tested. So they are trying to do just that, to figure out their movements and where they're moving through to inform land management. Next. And now I will turn it over to Chris Tonner at Ohio State University to talk about a few projects he has done with his lab. He's probably used Modus most extensively in the Midwest. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris, for a few minutes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks, everybody. It's been great to hear about all this global, coordination and all the awesome projects going on. But I warned Sarah I'm a blabbermouth, so I'm going to try and just quickly go through these and focus more on just kind of what we've done than specific findings. But I just want to first acknowledge that our array that we've been using in the western basin of Lake Erie was first set up by Bryant Dossman, who was a graduate student of Paul Rodewald before I got here to OSU. And they did this project on American redstarts and yellow-rumped warblers, where they were able to show kind of predictors of lake crossing behavior and departure behavior for birds stopping over on spring migration. Found about 75% of those birds, even though they were all the way over in the Western Basin, were still crossing the open water of Lake Erie rather than going around the western portion of the lake. Next. And probably our most prolific project thus far was Jay Wright's master's project in my lab. Jay worked on rusty blackbirds, trying to fill in information gaps on their stopover behavior. Thanks, Bill. Their stopover behavior and ecology. And so we published these 3 papers that used Modus at several different scales, from the site scale to the landscape to the regional, to really kind of tease apart their needs during stopover and also their behavior. Also, interestingly here, found a similar percentage, over 75% of the birds, which we were surprised, crossed the open water of Lake Erie, and also that they were nocturnal migrants, which they were thought to be diurnal migrants before we started putting these Modus tags on them. Next. We also worked in Lake Erie on black-crowned night herons, and similar to the Black Tern project, this was tagging nestlings, 2 colonies in Ohio in the Lake Erie Basin, and using Modus to both the larger network and our local array of towers to get good estimates of post-fledging and juvenile survival, and some measures of recruitment, because using the larger tags, they lasted for 2 years. So these birds don't return to their natal colonies. If they do, for 2 years after. So we did find some differences in post-fledging survival between males and females, which was pretty interesting using Modus tagging nestlings. Next. And that was by Christy Stein, another master's student in my lab, and that should be forthcoming. Also, in collaboration with Bob Gates and the Winus Point Marsh Conservancy, we had a couple of students tagging Jim Hansen and Nicole Hengst, tagging rails, both Virginia rail and Sora, looking not only at their movements, but just when migrants versus breeders are passing through the region, and finding some issues with that associated with the coordinated marsh bird surveys, that at the time the surveys are taking place in Ohio in the Lake Erie marshes is actually when there are a lot of migrants still present, potentially affecting, you know, the value of those counts in terms of the timing, and suggesting we need more information on regionally when only breeders are present if we're going to use those as a measure of breeding populations. Next. So Jay Wright, who did the Rusty Blackbird work, has now moved on to blue jays for his PhD dissertation. And he's been using a couple of Modus towers and Modus tags to measure overwinter survival for blue jays, which move around quite a bit. And so it allows us to get a lot of passive detections to confirm, you know, live versus dead birds, and still locate birds for doing known fate analysis. He's also been using Modus tags in nuts. So I'm going to guess I'm the only one today that has put a Modus tag in a nut. So we've been putting Modus tags in acorns and chestnuts, and then putting them out for blue jays, getting them to cache those, and just hand tracking them to find those cache locations. A lot of this trying to figure out if blue jays will really enhance the potential reintroduction of American chestnut to our forests in Appalachia and elsewhere. Next. And then a project that we kind of started in a pilot sense with white-throated sparrows at my station at OSU, tagging birds to look at effects of winter conditions and stress on departure date, and then also looking at migratory routes of these birds after they leave our site. And this has grown into a larger project of lake crossing behavior, which I'm going to be recruiting a student to start. So if you have any potential graduate students looking for a project, I have funding for a master's student to take on a project not only to work on whitethroats. We're really going to target blackpoll warbler, possibly Canada warbler, and other birds that don't breed in Ohio, and try to tag them lower down in the state. Most of our lake crossing data comes from birds that are already on the lake shore. We want to see how many birds cross the lake from further south, and if they're concentrating in certain crossing locations, or if they're just kind of shotgunning across the lake. So next slide, I think that's my last one. Okay.
Thanks
Thanks everybody.
Thanks so much. I don't think we have time for questions, but I appreciate everybody.
You guys were so informative. There are no questions, but that's okay. So we have the next two are videos. So we'll make up for a little bit of time. The nuts is news to me. That's awesome. So we'll run those videos with a little break in between. And then following that, we will have a 10-minute break for everybody to stretch their legs or do what you got to do. So thank you very much, and we'll catch up with you soon.
I'm Scott Whitensall with the Northeast Modus Collaboration, and I'm going to be discussing Modus developments in Eastern Canada and the Northeastern US, which, because of Birds Canada, has the oldest and the best developed Modus network in the world. I'm going to be touching on work in Ontario, Quebec, Atlantic Canada, and the Mid-Atlantic and New England states in the US. We're going to start off in Ontario, and please note I'm going to be dealing primarily with passer and focus projects in southeastern Canada, since Christian Fries will be discussing work mostly with shorebirds in the eastern Canadian north. Although the COVID pandemic reduced fieldwork last year, with the number of tagging projects and the number of animals tagged seeing a fairly dramatic decline in 2020, there remains a great deal of innovative work being done in this region by a variety of researchers. In fact, because of the number of projects in this region and our limited time, I'm not going to be able to mention all of them by any stretch of the imagination. But you get a sense here of some of the interesting projects that are going on: bats with thrushes, stopover ecology at places like Long Point, a lot of work being done with swallows. And despite the pandemic, the number of deployed receivers in Ontario actually increased last year from 123 to 133 with an additional project. One standout project I want to highlight here, and I'm somewhat biased because doctoral candidate Elora Graham at Guelph University is one of my former owl banding volunteers from our Sawwood owl bandings projects in Pennsylvania. But Elora is using Modus to track, at this point, almost 200 common nighthawks and eastern whippoorwills. She's looking to determine breeding ground survival, departure dates, and migratory connectivity for these two declining species of conservation concern. Turning now to Quebec, and I'm grateful here to Camille and her colleagues for the opportunity to show a few examples of the work that they've been doing in that province over the past 8 years, with more than 1,800 tags deployed and a remarkable 160 receivers deployed at various times and places. Among the many projects going on in Quebec is the tagging work at Tatasac Bird Observatory on the north shore of St. Lawrence, which is the most northerly bird observatory in eastern Canada, where they've tagged more than 400 birds of 9 species. Junior Tremblay, whose research interest focuses on how climate change is affecting northern bird species, is using Modus and tagging birds at Tatasac for the first time to look at the migrations of horned larks and American pipits. The larks are shown here in red and the pipits in blue. Both of these are species that are going to be a continued focus of tagging at Tatasac this year during the field season. Another really fascinating project that the Quebec group has undertaken is employing Modus to study the use of natural nest sites by declining chimney swifts, which is an aspect of their ecology that's virtually unknown. Until this study, I think only 4 natural nest sites had been documented in Quebec, and all of them, I believe, in trees that had already been cut down. So they were tagging chimney swifts at chimney roost sites, lowering nets down inside the chimneys to trap the birds, tagging them, and then using the Modus network and mobile surveys to track the birds away from the roost. And they were able to find several natural nest sites and hollow trees in the forest up to 22 kilometers from the roost site. A really significant improvement in our understanding of this aspect of chimney swift ecology, which is going to be increasingly important as more and more chimneys are decommissioned and closed up and torn down. In order to estimate the migratory connectivity in eastern Swainson's thrushes, which is a species that's been tagged extensively in Quebec and Atlantic Canada, Camille and her colleagues worked with data from 6 tagging sites, basically from the Great Lakes to Tatasac, analyzing detections by 1-degree blocks and showing both how the thrush routes converge on the Florida Peninsula, but also how they maintain a spatial structure at the regional scale, which may have important implications for protecting stopover locations for this bird. Turning now to Atlantic Canada, here's an overview of recent tagging projects that have been going on there, which continued last year despite the pandemic, although albeit at a somewhat smaller scale. And this slide shows the major project groups going on in Atlantic Canada. Now, understand that some of these overall projects encompass a variety of species-specific projects under a single PI's umbrella. And this also shows receiver deployments over the past 2 years. And when I say there's these large umbrellas, for example, Phil Taylor at Acadia University has a wide range of projects investigating species as diverse as blackpoll warblers, shown here, Swainson's thrush, Ipswich sparrows that breed on Sable Island, post-breeding behavior of 4 species of swallows, even green darner dragonfly migration. And Phil's also been using Modus to study birds like herring and great blackback gulls that are large enough for more traditional satellite units, but can take advantage of the fact that we have this extensive coastal Modus array to follow their movements a little bit less expensively. So along with southern Ontario and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, I think the densest array of Modus stations is in the northeastern US. And the majority of the work in this region has been done by the Northeast Modus Collaboration, which I'm part of, based at the Willistown Conservation Trust in Pennsylvania. And the Northeast Collaboration is a partnership between Willistown, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History's Powder Mill Nature Reserve in southwestern Pennsylvania, the Ned Smith Center for Nature and Art in central Pennsylvania, and Project OWLNet. And we in turn have been working with a large number of private NGO and agency partners using a combination of about $250,000 in private donations that we raised, along with state agency grants and 2 very large U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grants, in all totaling more than $2.6 million in U.S. funds that we've been able to pour into building out the Modus infrastructure in that region. Because we've taken a somewhat unusual approach in simply building out receiver infrastructure at a regional scale, rather than siting receivers on a project-by-project basis, although our partner organizations and researchers whose work has been partly funded through some of these grants I just mentioned are doing species-specific work. But we've taken an if you build it, they will come philosophy. And we have built it. Between 2017 and the end of 2020, we've installed nearly 90 sites and have more or less completed our work in the Mid-Atlantic states and New York, although we are now going back and updating and upgrading many of those earlier sites that were built in 2017 and 2018 to make them dual mode, both for 166 and 464 megahertz. Now we're ramping up site planning and installations in New England, where thanks to another Fish and Wildlife Service grant, we're going to be putting up another 50 receivers. Don't try to make any particular sense out of this planning map. This is just to show you what a wide net we've cast with the goal of creating kind of a ladder-like series of east to west picket fence lines of receivers across the region. And by the time we're finished in 2023, we'll be operating about 136 sites in 12 states. And the results have been spectacular. Since we erected our first significant array in Pennsylvania in 2017, the Northeast Modus Network has made an astounding 11.7 million detections that represent 1,700 individual animals of 85 species. And just to give you a little sense of what those 85 species entail, a lot of these detections are really fascinating and surprising. These are some of the most frequently detected species, including some that you would not have expected to see at what is primarily an inland telemetry system. We were shocked, for example, to find that the single most frequently detected species at our inland Modus network is the federally threatened red knot, more than 350 of them, most tagged along the Atlantic coast, especially on Delaware Bay, but a bird that is rarely, if ever, sighted away from the Atlantic coast in the Northeast. But Modus reminds us that the airspace over the land is just as important to these migratory animals as the land and the waters below it. So with that, I will say thank you very much and open things up for questions, which my colleagues are going to have to answer because I am unable to be there today. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Scott. Scott Weidenthal. And we're going to move straight on to Terry Cook to tell us about the Southeast Modus network. And then I'll jump in after that to take us on our break.
Hey everybody, my name is Terry Cook. I am the State Director for the Nature Conservancy in Tennessee. Happy to be with you today, happy to provide an overview of Modus efforts in the Southeast. I want to thank those of you that answered my emails or got on the phone with me, help educate me about some efforts that I knew very little about. There are probably those of you on the phone that would have done a much better job in presenting an overview. But I'm really grateful for those of you who shared sort of your knowledge and expertise with me as I tried to summarize some of this information.
De vous transmettre au mieux toutes ces informations.
Of course, that I'm going to be focused on is the Southeast. These are the states. And I really just tried to pull a lot of the information off the Modus website at modus.org and try to provide a little bit of an overview, a summary, sort of the state, if you will. The number of Modus projects that we currently have ongoing, about 42. And you know, I kind of heavy loaded some of those in Florida. Adam Smith with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who has been conducting a project of installation of towers, stations on refuges, really cover the North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi. It's not always easy to kind of break all that information when there are kind of many sort of projects are aggregated under sort of one project name. But this gives you a little bit of an idea. Most of our states do have at least one station, some much more. We have a few like Alabama and Arkansas that don't yet have stations, but I know there are folks that are working hard to try to correct that. If you look at the growth of stations over the last few years from 2014 to 2021, sort of a cumulative number of stations that we have. So there is really positive growth, and I think that will continue going into the future, hopefully being able to sort of replicate what some of the other regions are doing in terms of creating fences and having a really good distribution of efforts out there. If you look at the number of stations, not number of projects, but if you start looking at the stations, this gives you a little bit of an idea of their distribution. Florida sort of leading the way. A lot of those, when I pulled this information, I really kind of looked at the map and did some manual counting, try to make sure this is as accurate as possible. Again, we have some states like Tennessee where we're working. We really 2 years ago, we didn't have any stations, and now you're going to be seeing an acceleration in Tennessee and no doubt other states as well in terms of the number of stations that will be coming online. Right now, just historically, much of the stations that have gone in are coastal stations, just with the focus on shorebirds. So if you look at this, you'll see like Virginia, 11 stations are coastal, 4 are interior. South Carolina, 11 are coastal, 3 interior. Louisiana, 8 coastal, 4 interior. So really pretty heavily weighted toward the coastal. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody, but it does point out that there really needs to be a focus more on establishing interior stations. So a couple years ago, when we were first establishing some stations here in Tennessee, we had put one up on a grain elevator in Clarksville, Tennessee, right on the border with Kentucky. And we got this hit soon thereafter. It was pretty exciting for us. It was really, you know the feeling when you're checking modus.org and you're trying to see if you're picking up any species coming through. So that was really sort of our big first excitement around understanding sort of the power of these stations. But if you look at the backdrop, you can see that the southeast, heavily forested area in the country, and really a lack of towers within that interior. So much of that north to south or south to north movement is being lost, understanding the importance of some of these southern temperate forests. We're starting to populate those areas, but we've got a long ways to go. And we also understand that there's such an important area in terms of understanding the ecology of so many of the species that we care about. Stations, antenna frequency. Again, this is probably not new news to anybody. Early on, the station establishment, all were 166. Increasingly, those stations are now coming on as dual stations. You'll see I've got a column for 434. I think this is just those 434 only stations may actually be dual stations, but I didn't have really enough data. It doesn't really change the story that there is a lot of work to be done in terms of converting our 166 to dual stations to really maximize the utility of the stations that we have out currently, as well as any new stations coming online. So I also wanted to try to summarize a little bit about the focal species that were being looked at. And it was really hard to do looking at the Modus website. So not a great way to organize it, but when in doubt, just throw that information into a word cloud. At least you get something pretty to look at. You can see a lot of various species were listed, and so there you have various. Some weren't listed at all. You do have some initiatives like Gold-winged warbler or some of the shorebirds. We know increasingly here in Tennessee, North Carolina, more work focused on bats, but lots of opportunities in terms of better articulating what the focal species are and connecting researchers to one another. I think another need that we have is really activating the research community, not necessarily those that are establishing stations, but those that could take advantage of the fact that there are stations out on that landscape. We need to seek a higher return of investment. When we put stations out there, we need to have multiple researchers taking advantage of that, of every station that's put out there. And I think that's one of the big challenges in showing the value of this, not only get them on the landscape, but getting researchers, graduate students, all on board to take advantage of this great effort. When you look at active tags deployed, again, not a lot of data in terms of trying to put this together, but I still wanted to show this slide in terms of large investments being made, oftentimes single stations, oftentimes a single species focus, but not a lot of additional researchers probably coming to the table to deploy tags, even if they are not really the managers of that tower. And so I do think there is some work to be done there in terms of getting the word out, as well as helping motivate, incentivize researchers to take advantage of this great infrastructure that is being put out there. And then I tried to do a little projection, what's going to be going on in the future, and where I had information. I know Tennessee, we do have money in hand. Our partners, TWRA and the Nature Conservancy, as well as some of our other partners. So over the next year, plus there'll be probably at least 20 towers put in. Louisiana has an effort underway. I know Adam Smith has an effort underway to install additional towers over the next year and a half or so. But this gives you a little bit of idea in terms of the growth, and this growth for, what I would say is that we need to do better. There's great opportunities. We've seen in other regions their ability to tap into state wildlife grant funding to do sort of large-scale funding initiatives that go cut across multiple states. I really think that's one of the things that we need to take on and move forward over the next year. So I appreciate being able to just provide a very quick overview. I did want to let you know that we have formed a Southeast Modus working group. It's really in its infancy. We have maybe 30 or so people that are signed up. We hold a Zoom call on the first Monday of every month, and as people have time, they join and just kind of share project updates. If they have technical questions they're trying to solve, they have a chance to put that in front of the group, and hopefully we can provide some value in those conversations. If you can't make those calls, I do try to record those when I remember to, and I post those on a box folder. So we have established a box folder for the Southeast Modus Working Group, and projects are free to put folders, subfolders in there that you can upload photos, research reports, grant applications, photos of installation, any of those things that just help the rest of the Modus community learn from what you are doing and hopefully flatten that learning curve. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Terry. I think you're with us. There you are. That was great. Thank you very much. And miraculously, we're right on time. I don't see any questions, but there's lots of good chatter. So if anything comes up, please feel free to put it in the chat. We're going to take about a 12-minute break right now, which is going to take us to 1:41 exactly Eastern time. I'm just going to throw a generic slide on, and then we'll tune back in at about 1:40. So thank you very much for your attention so far, and to all our panelists, and I look forward to the rest of the session. Thanks again, Terry. That was great. You good, Julian?
Yeah, I'm here. How's it going?
Very good. Thanks for joining us. We'll just give it one more minute and then we'll go. But Allison, as soon as she's back, she'll queue you up. And
All right.
We're at it. Ooh. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have Julian Garcia Welter, who's been instrumental in organizing a lot of the work underway in Mexico. And I won't steal any more of his thunder, so take it away whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Stu. So welcome, everybody. My name is Julian Garcia Welter. I'm a Mexican biologist. I work at Pronatura Noroeste, and I'm also a PhD student at the University of South Carolina. Today, I want to talk on behalf of all of our really great partners from all around Mexico who are being instrumental in helping us expand Motus into Mexico. Next. And I guess the dream for everybody here in Mexico and Latin America is to be able to connect the non-breeding grounds of many shorebirds and other migratory birds with the breeding grounds. And we want to do this in able to support conservation when and where it's most needed. However, next, the big problem of pushing this dream to come true was very difficult at the beginning. As you can see, linking the breeding grounds with the wintering grounds of birds and getting to know all this really cool data that you can get with Motus, it's pretty difficult if you don't have Motus stations. And that was the case on 2019 when I started looking into Motus. There were literally no Motus stations on the west, 0 Motus stations in Mexico, and we didn't have the knowledge or trained staff to even start a regional Motus network in Mexico. There was also, and this is a big problem, no interest or leverage on even starting a regional network on Mexico. People were thinking, why should I install stations and how can I get my investment? Because there are no stations, I won't get nothing in return. Next. So when I really tried to push to create a Motus network in Mexico was when I started my PhD at the University of South Carolina. I started working with the Pacific redknot that breeds in Alaska, then comes all the way to Mexico to spend its non-wintering season in the coast all around Northwest Mexico. These are estuaries, intertidal mudflats, and beaches. So my approach to tackle this issue was to kind of look for other bird species who would benefit from the habitats that are being used by redknots. Next. Next. And I identified different birds, next, which are priority birds for the region. These are shorebirds and marine birds. And I literally just went on knocking on doors of all the different people who was working with these areas and really telling them, hey, look, if you install this station in your study area and we submit a joint proposal, you can study your species, but also contribute to the greater good and share infrastructure for us to have a really cool regional network on Northwest Mexico. Pronatura Noroeste was instrumental of making this effort possible, as they had hosted me at the beginning to coordinate this effort and then hired me, at least temporarily. So we now have a network of different partners that are having their own regional agenda, but are benefiting from this shared infrastructure. So with our first funded grant, we're going to be tagging more than 150 birds and installing around 15 to 25 stations, depending on the sites. And it's really cool because all of our stations are going to be dual mode thanks to the new collaborations that have been coming up with Environment Canada and thanks to the support of MPG Ranch. So it's really exciting to see what's been happening in really short time. Next. Right around the same time as we applied for this grant, our friends from Bird Conservancy of the Rockies were also applying for funding, and at the same time they got awarded a few grants to establish the Great Plains and Chihuahuan Desert Initiative that we heard from Matt Webb. So this is really cool because their project is binational and extends to Mexico, and they plan to install around 10 to 12 stations on the next years into Mexico. So if you're interested in working in this area, get in contact with Erin Strasser. Her contact is below on this slide, because they are looking for partners to find sites to establish these stations, and also to provide training for graduate students, for organizations to benefit from this network of stations. They are focused mainly on the focal species, which are migratory birds that are used in grasslands, such as the bird sparrow, grasshopper sparrow, etc. And I think they have around 100 tags to tag these birds on the next seasons. And they're also collaborating with local organizations such as Pronatura Noreste and other universities. Next, the last medulla project for the Motus network in Mexico, it's the Istmus of Tehuantepec, which is very recent, and it has been spearheaded by the leadership of Bird Studies Canada, MPG Ranch, thanks to William Blake, and Cellular Tracking Technologies, who donated a few sensor stations. So this project is being coordinated by other Pronaturas, Pronatura Sur and Pronatura Veracruz, as well as some university. And the strategy here is not project-based. It is a station fence that is going to be installed on the Istmus of Tehuantepec, the narrowest part of Mexico. And as you can see from the image, it is like a big funnel where all the migratory flyways converge. And the goal here is to try to detect as many species as possible as they migrate. So also they're working to try to put Motus stations into wind farms, which is a big deal on the south of Mexico. So that's pretty exciting. If you want to contact Eric Molina, his contact is down below. Next. So here's how the Motus network looks in Mexico right now. It's a very small number of 6 stations, but you need to consider that due to the COVID situation, we were unable to go into the field, and we were able to install these few stations in just a few months. We envisioned that in the next 2 or 3 years, we could add around 40 more stations with these 3 initiatives and the other initiatives that should come like a snowball effect. So this is how it looks for the next 2 or 3 years with all the stations in Mexico in combination with the other ones that are planned elsewhere. Next. So of course, Latin America has a lot of new challenges that do not exist in other countries on the north. For example, increased theft, the lack of equipment, lack of training, a very big learning curve, and of course, funding. Next. But over the next 2 years, we have been tackling many of these issues and trying to make the Motus learning curve more of a learning ladder for people. So for example, we have been able to provide a few workshops next. And these are the first workshops that are completely in Spanish. It is pre-recorded and you can find it on YouTube. And it is meant to introduce people into Motus to try to provide some trust to the network. There's also a lot of different new resources that were not available 2 years ago, which people should use and should benefit to make Motus a little bit more accessible. Next. We know that in Mexico, we have all the equipment to build Motus stations. We have found new and cheaper vendors for tower structures, for providing power to the stations, for buying antennas and coaxial cable. What we're lacking still is an ability to buy and bring the sensor stations and the tags into the country. This remains the greatest challenge right now because there are complicated importation, logistics, and costs, and a lot of waiting time. So one of the solutions is either to use a sensor gnome or to find a US partner that can help you with this procedure. There are many creative ways to bring the equipment into the country, or also to ask vendors, whether it's antennas or sensor stations or others, to try to help us and expand their operations into other countries. Next. So about funding, we have found that a regional approach is really well seen with funders when you do a joint grant with many other partners that you have previously identified, and this has very good success rate. If you want to do a project-based initiative in which you only want one station for your own purposes, donations or smaller foundations are a good option. But by far, collaborations make things a lot easier. For example, here in this example, Environment Canada is tracking shorebirds in the north. We are tracking shorebirds in Mexico, but they were tracking them with nanotags at 166 megahertz. We were tracking them with 434 megahertz. And what we decided was to collaborate and outfit our stations to suit both of our objectives and identifying both tags. And that worked really well. Next. So I want to thank all of the partners that have made this possible. If you have any questions, you can contact me or my other collaborators. So thank you.
Excellent, Julian, gracias. I don't think we have any specific questions yet, but we'll give people a couple minutes. I don't think I'll ever get sick of seeing Motus stations in different environments. I love it. And
all right, thank you.
Nick, you're good to go.
Ready when you are.
Getting there. Okay, you can feel free to take it away whenever you like, sir. So this my pleasure to welcome Nick Bailey from Selva to enlighten us on some more exciting developments in Central and Northern South America. So take it away, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks, Stu, and hi to everybody. So yeah, on our Motus World Tour, we are now heading into the steamy forests of Central and Northern South America. Your host for this session is myself, Nick Bailey. I work with a Colombian NGO called Selva. Since 2015, we've had multiple projects with Motus, working with a range of different species, going from gray-cheeked thrushes to black-poll warblers to yellow-billed cuckoos. I'm not seeing the presentation. Is it up?
No, just give us a second. I think we have a.
All right, I'll carry on talking.
Yeah,
and above and beyond research projects, myself and others in Selva have been working as hard as we can to try and support the increase in infrastructure, both in Colombia, where we're based, and also in Central America. And that has led to collaborations in Costa Rica, Panama, and Nicaragua. And also joining us today will be Ernesto Carman from Proyecto Cerulli in Costa Rica. And Ernesto is becoming a key player in Central America, and he'll fill us in on some of the plans for Costa Rica.
Okay, Nick, sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to switch control.
All right.
And then put your presentation up. So just bear with us for 1 second. Seeing the right thing or the wrong thing, Nick?
I'm seeing it, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, bear with me 1 moment.
I'm just seeing the deck of slides on the left-hand side still. All right, I think we're up and running. So you can move on to the next slide straight off, Stu. Okay, so I wanted to begin just by giving a little bit of the history of Motus within this region. So back in 2015, no great surprise, there were no stations within Central or Northern South America. And the first stations came apart, as has happened in many other areas, through project-led growth. So through a collaboration between Selva, Birds Canada, and Environment and Climate Change Canada, we were able to get the first station set up in 2015. So next slide, please. So these first two stations were linked to PhD projects led by Colombian students, one in the Andes, in more or less in the center of Colombia, as you can see there, and a second one right up on the Caribbean coast in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And I just want to share some of the results of those studies briefly, just to give you an idea of what was possible next. So the first project I'll talk about was that led by Camila Gomez. She worked on the stopover ecology of gray-cheeked thrushes in northern Colombia, just before they left Colombia, heading north towards North America. And this really was the first time that Motus was used or was tested to see whether it was possible to track birds between continents. So in this case, between South America and North America. Next. And the answer was a resounding yes. It was far more successful than I think any of us imagined when we started out with this project. And we got detection rates of around 40% in terms of the number of birds that were tagged in Colombia and detected further north. But even more remarkable was we were able to confirm that gray-cheeked thrushes on leaving Colombia make a phenomenal 3,000, often 3,000 kilometer direct flight to North America, but also not just to North America, but right into the heart, into the Midwest of North America. So a strategy completely unknown previously, and obviously a remarkable demonstration of the power of Motus at the continental scale. Next. And so the second project I wanted to highlight here was the PhD work of Ana Gonzalez. She really focused on how wintering habitats affect birds at different moments of the annual cycle. And obviously here Motus had a role as well, because she was able to track Swainson's thrushes having left shade coffee plantations or forests in Colombia, and track them north and understand how the occupation of winter habitats actually affected migratory timing and pace. So again, another phenomenal demonstration of the power of Motus, and also emphasizes just how lucky we are working down here in the south, because we've got this remarkable array that we've seen in the talks earlier to the north of us. So really, there's an advantage to doing studies from Latin America because there is such a high detection rate as birds head north through this ever-growing array in North America. And one of the things I want to emphasize in this talk is that I hope we can mirror that effort, or that the number of stations in the south as we move forward, so the same opportunities are open to researchers sending birds south from North America. Next. So to that end, Motus has been slowly but steadily growing within the region. So in 2016, Selva also worked to put in a series of strategic stations in northwestern Colombia, in a really critical region that concentrates millions of birds as they enter Central America into South America. And we've seen a whole bunch of detections in previous talks of nighthawks, Swainson's thrushes that have hit those three towers you can see at the entrance to South America there. Next. And then pretty much around the same time, another strategic fence went in Panama. This was an initiative led by Birds Canada and with local support from Panama Audubon, Selva, and more recently from Proyecto Cerulia, to get this fence in, which is such an important fence that cuts the Isthmus of Panama at its thinnest point, where it is just a mere 70 kilometers wide, obviously presenting a phenomenal opportunity to detect any birds migrating through the Central American landmass. And then since then, we've seen gradual growth with adding towers in Costa Rica, in Nicaragua, and Belize. Next. But clearly there's still a lot of, whoa, go back, one more, there we go. Clearly there's still a lot more work to be done, and as many others, we have the dream of expanding the Motus network throughout this region. And the exciting news, and some of that we've already seen from Sarah and others earlier, is that there's a lot of plans in the pipeline. So Costa Rica, Ernesto will talk about that very shortly, but there's a lot of potential stations going in. In Nicaragua, the Southern Sierra Research Station in collaboration with Paso Pacifico are planning to get stations along Pacific coast. In Nicaragua and Guatemala, American Bird Conservancy have been funding a series of efforts with partners in the region, and I've been told that next week the first stations in Guatemala should be going up, so that's super exciting as well. And again, from that fantastic grant that the Midwest Migratory Network with Sarah Kendrick that they led to get some antennas for Central and South America, there will be more stations going in Colombia as well. So we're beginning to fill the picture, but what are the real key areas that we would like to see more infrastructure? So clearly the northern coast of Colombia is a highly strategic region for birds, both entering and leaving South America. So this is one area where we'd like to grow the fence and fill in the gaps. Equally, above and beyond Panama, there are a number of opportunities to put in very highly strategic fences through Central America, and taking advantage of the geography of Central America, where really with a small number of stations, you can actually create these east-west fences that will intercept the path of many birds. And above and beyond these strategic fences, the idea is to be able to start to provide infrastructure in critical wintering areas for steeply declining species such as golden wing warblers or cerulean warblers that could really benefit conservation efforts. Next. So what have been the challenges and the solutions we've found? Well, obviously, this has been very much organic growth so far, and there has not been much coordination of the effort. However, we hope that is about to change. Just earlier in this year, a new Motus working group for Central and Northern South America was formed. The remit of that group is to help to start to coordinate regional activities and basically put out that dream, work out where we think the most strategic sites are for stations, but also at the same time providing technical assistance and support to individuals or groups who are looking to set up stations or set up projects within the region. As many others have mentioned, obviously funding is always an issue, and that's particularly acute in this region, Central and South America, where we have very little access to possible funding resources in country, and often rely on North American partners to fund much of these efforts. Local capacity is obviously another issue. It's one thing to get the equipment, but we need people who can set it up. We've been working hard at building that technical capacity from Selva, and we now have partners in Central America with Ernesto and Paz, who are working really hard to expand the network throughout Central America, but we still need more capacity on the ground. And to that end, we hope to hold a workshop later this year, COVID allowing, to start to train individuals from Panama and Nicaragua as well. And as Julian mentioned in the previous talk, getting equipment into these countries is often a little bit of a headache. So just like is happening in Mexico, we're looking at means of being able to source this equipment locally. And this is really a key issue to the expansion of Motus in these regions, because moving equipment around is often a real headache. So with that, I will hand over to Ernesto, who will give us an update on what is happening in Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, and certainly it has been an exciting year here in Costa Rica. So we have gone through a very steep increase in the number of Motus stations. We went from having only 2 to 13 by the end of this year, most of which should be up in. Yep, next slide, please. Thank you. So we have gone from 2 to 13 by the end of this year, and most of these should be up and running by this coming fall migration. And this set of stations will actually help complete one of the strategic fences Nick was talking about from the Caribbean to the Pacific. You can see it right across there, across central Costa Rica. And some of them are also in very important stopover and wintering habitat for species such as cerulean warblers, golden wings, olive-sided flycatchers, and wood thrush, just to mention a few, of course. However, there are still some areas which we aim to cover in the near future, and they are some like the important flyways of the North Caribbean and wintering habitat for species such as wood thrush on the Caribbean foothills, golden winged warblers in the middle elevations, and the Golfo de Nicoya on the Pacific, which is a very important stopover site and wintering site for species such as semi-palmated and western sandpipers. And this year, we hope to begin with tag deployment in Costa Rica. And with the infrastructure that's going to be in place, we hope this will encourage more projects to do the same. Now, the installation of this network, of course, was only possible thanks to the great collaboration between many institutions, both foreign and local, working together very well and made things run very smoothly. So we hope we will, in the next or the near future, let's say, we'll increase from 13 to even more and fill in a lot of these gaps. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it open for questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick and Ernesto. So there was one question from Laura Cook, just addressing whether the expansion in Central America will be dual mode, so listening to 166 and 434 megahertz. I'm happy to. The resounding answer is where possible, yes. There's some existing infrastructure that is older and may take longer to transform to dual mode, or local projects may choose one frequency over the other. So it'll always be a balancing act. But in terms of the permanent infrastructure, we're doing that where we can. So I think that's great. Thank you very much, Nick and Ernesto. There's no other questions, but feel free to hop on in the chat. If anybody has anything to say, there's lots of encouragement and excitement happening there. And moving farther south into southern South America is Arne Listerhuis from the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Network, and he's going to summarize what's going on down there. So thank you very much, Arne, and take it away whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Stu. I hope you can hear me okay, just to check.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, sometimes that's an issue here. So yeah, my name is Arne. So I work as a shorebird conservation and monitoring specialist for the Wizard Executive Office, which is part of Manomet's Flyway program. But I'm also a consultant for Guira Paraguay here in Paraguay, which is the local BirdLife partner where I actually started my career about 2 decades ago. I do not really consider myself a Modus expert, but I volunteered to give this presentation as I'm very interested in the program. And I hope to see it further expand in South America. Also, well, many of the antennas in South America are located in wizard sites, which are sites that are or have been identified as being priority sites for shorebirds. So my limited experience with Modus is that I installed 2 towers here in Paraguay, but both are passive antennas. There has been no active tagging in Paraguay yet, but I always mention that I'm very proud on the one detection that we had down here, which was a white-rump sandpiper that was tagged in James Bay. So we had some limited success as a passive antenna. Next, please. So I will present briefly on current Modus activities in South America. And I hope to cover most of the important activities, but if not, like others said as well, please shout out after I finish or correct me where I missed important things. This is based on what we got from the region. As you can see on the map, there are about 26 towers in 8 countries, and the majority are along the coast, along the Atlantic and the Pacific coast. Not so many in the interior just yet. That would be great to have more towers in the interior, because also a lot of birds migrate through that area. A lot of the towers are actually passive. So there are only a couple of these where there are actually tagging going on. But the passive ones are really located on great places, like what you see here, one over the Mana rice fields in France Guyana, which is a passive one. But also I visited one which is in
in Bahia Lomas in Argentina, which you can see there, where well, almost near that box there, which is located on a lighthouse, which is pretty cool as well. Next, please. So in South America, there's currently no really overarching coordination going on. There's no real collaboration or groups like in other areas. But there are a number of active projects. However, the majority are focused mainly on shorebirds, but a couple are also focused on passerines and swallows, actually. They are mostly independent projects, but I mean, in the end, with Modus, the beauty is that if you tag a bird somewhere, it will be detected at another tower, hopefully. So it's complementary to some extent, of course. For example, they had red knots tagged in Bahia Lomas, which is the far south, the southern tip of South America, which were observed, detected at French Guiana, which is a passive site, but still a passive tower, but still useful. Maybe one of the reasons that a lot has been focused on shorebirds is that, well, they're pretty tied to specific sites, much more so than other birds like passerines, which, well, when they arrive in South America, they really spread out and get more or less lost in the big forests. Whereas with shorebirds, at this point, we know pretty well where they go, and then they have a high site fidelity, so they will come back to the same site year after year. And next. So in general, what's going on with projects? Again, they're mostly focused on sites along the Pacific and the Atlantic coasts, and species that are being tagged. So far, there are like 3-4 species that have been tagged. All shorebirds, which are semi-palmated sandpiper, red knot, Tonian godwit, and western sandpiper. Of these, the majority are actually species of concern at the global level. And that's probably why there is a focus on those to understand more the connectivity. There is a lot of collaboration with northern partners. And so there are local groups and organizations working with those that actually presented earlier today as well. There's a lot of collaboration there with people from the north who are interested in understanding more about these shorebirds. Next. But as I mentioned before, there are also a couple of projects focusing on passerines. They include 2 species of swallows. So it's the purple martin that is being studied in the Brazilian Amazon, and there also recently there was a project started on understanding connectivity of barn swallows. There are, in 2009, as you can see, they tagged about 86 birds, 22 this year. Actually, here in Paraguay, we tried to catch some barn swallows for this project as well, but unfortunately, we weren't that successful with that. It's not easy here to find the right spot for these birds. They come through in the thousands, but then being at the right site at the right time, that's still tricky. Yeah, next. Okay, here just to show some examples based on the information that we got in. This is a study on connectivity and winter ecology of semi-palmated sandpipers that's being carried out in Bancos do Cajuais. My Portuguese isn't that well. This is actually a wisdom site. It's a site important to the red knot, but also semi-palmated sandpipers. So there's a couple of partners working there to understand migration and connectivity of the semi-palmated sandpiper. On the slide, you can see a couple of highlights on what they have discovered so far. But maybe on the next slide, it's nice to show that. And if you can go to the next slide, is what they have been, studying is they've been looking at the movements of the sandpipers there. And if you look at the graph on the left side, you can see these orange and blue lines, which are sunrise and sunset. So you can see that between sunset and sunrise, so during the night, birds are actually using the flats to forage, whereas during the daytime they are not. So they really focus on the night. And then there are still gaps in there, which is when the tide is high, of course, because then birds can't use it. And then what they also showed on the right one, sorry, did I say left before? I don't know. Now look at the right, on the right one. You can see how they interact with the tide, where it shows that when the tide is low, the birds are actually on the tidal flat, but when the tide comes up, they actually go to salt ponds that are in the area. So they move along with the tide, which is very interesting to see. And then they use that the Modus infrastructure for that. Next one. So then on the Pacific, there are a couple of projects there. They focus there on understanding also wintering ecologies and connectivity in Chile and Peru. That we focus on the sanderling, but also other shorebird species like the Hudsonian godwit, western sandpiper, semi-palmated sandpiper, and red knot. They have been tagging birds, so they have been tagging 77 birds so far. Some of those were also tagged in Texas, but the majority were tagged in Peru, in Paracas, which is also a wisdom site, and Isla Chiloé, which is also a wisdom site. So it's also for us very interesting to see all this work going on. Of the sanderlings in Peru, they had some successful results of birds being able to be tracked all the way up to Chaplin Lake in Canada, in which where they like covered over 7,000 kilometers in like 30 days. So that's really impressive. Next. So then all the way in the far south, Bahia Lomas, again, a very important wisdom site. It's analogous to James Bay in Canada, and that it's largely uninhabited. It supports the largest overwintering population of the Rufa red knot and the second largest population of the Hudsonian godwit. And it supports like tens of thousands of other shorebird species as well. They have 5 towers up there. I went there once. I saw one of them. They're very, very cool, distributed through the area, which is done in order to be able to track like local movement, to see how birds, and specifically the red knot, how they use these areas. Next, please. Again, I think there was something missing there. Yeah. So this is just an example of what they do when they track the local movements of the birds, showing that the highest rate of detections are in the northern part of the bay, where it also shows what kind of habitat it uses over there, and then to a lesser extent, it uses other areas of the area of the bay further south. So that's one of the reasons why you can use Modus at local scale, is understanding how they use a specific area that is so important to the species. And next. And then, of course, it also shows the connections with other sites. I mean, here are some very cool tracks of red knots and also Hudsonian godwits. I think, yeah, there's a Hudsonian godwit in there, which clearly shows the connections with other sites and how long they are at each site, when they arrive, when they leave, and giving a lot of information on how to connect sites and be able to work together in that way. Then next. But yeah, not everything is shorebirds, of course. For us at Wizard, it is, but I mean, there are a lot of other shorebirds. Apparently, there are a lot of other birds out there. But yeah, so here's a description of the work they do with the purple. I was almost saying purple sandpiper. You know, I'm really wired to shorebirds apparently. So the purple martin work that's being carried out by the Purple Martin Conservation Association, the University of Manitoba, and National Institute of Amazon Research. They have currently 2 towers up there in the Amazon. And they have been tagging birds there at the site. There is a roost there, which is like pretty impressive, of like over 500,000 purple martins that roost there. But they hope to expand, so they are hoping to expand their work there, add other towers, but also expanding more to the south to get towers elsewhere to be able to track these birds into further the interior of South America as well. Next one. So the challenges and barriers here in South America, I mean, I think a lot has been covered as well by the former speakers, which are pretty similar to the issues here. So there's a lack of local capacity really to expand, to set up these towers, but also local stores and equipment is a barrier really. I mean, a lot of stuff needs to come from the north, but then also that's pretty expensive, so that's quite hard to like a limitation here. As you can see, there is at this point still a very low density of stations throughout South America. If you compare that with North America, I mean, that's it's hard to track birds at this point based on that. But then again, it's also hard to get more towers out because there are a lot of areas that have very low density of people living, so it's hard to get to these areas. It's remote to put towers out, which is also expensive then, so there are not enough resources to actually get out there and put more of these towers up. And then also resources and instructions. I mean, currently there's not a lot in the languages that are spoken in South America. That's well, Spanish, Portuguese, but then you got French, and you got French, of course. Dutch would maybe something for in Suriname. Next. And there are, of course, a lot of opportunities. Well, first, probably the most important one is trying to get a working group to coordinate Modus efforts in the region, and perhaps then get somebody also to do this kind of presentation that knows even more about this than I do. But that would be like a great step to get a working group on Modus. Then also cross-continental connectivity between all WISN sites. I mean, particularly for us as WISN, Modus is extremely interesting because it will. I mean, having Modus towers in all WISN sites, that would be like a great dream. I mean, that way we can see how these sites are all connected. For some, we know it more or less based on banding results, but if you can even get towers out there, you can really connect all these important sites and show that to the people. I mean, there is a lot of opportunities to create new projects focused on passerine, and specifically the aerial insectivores, and then actually tagging birds here in the south, because it's harder to get them if you band them in the north. It's harder to detect them here because of the low number of towers you got here. So you will have more results if you tag them here and then be pretty sure that it gets detected somewhere in the north where they go to. And then, well, studies on austral migrants is an interesting one as well. I mean, often austral migrants are a little bit forgotten. And funds often go to North American species, but there are, I mean, also the austral migration system is highly interesting and highly complex as well. I mean, just here in Paraguay, we have resident birds. We have birds we think are resident, but actually move north, and we get the same species from the south up here. So we have them all year round, but it's different populations. You got birds that actually are resource migrants that go like from east to west. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to understand, and actually the whole Modus system can help with that. And finally, I mean, there are a lot of people here working on bird conservation, bird research. So, I mean, the people are pretty much there. It's mostly resources that's limited here. Well, with that, I want to close, and if there are any questions, and maybe there are people out there that can also answer. But thank you for your time. And thank for all the people who provided information, and I hope I presented it well enough. If not, I mean, also reach out to the people on this slide to get more information. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jarn. That was fantastic. Sort of catching up here. I don't think we have any immediate questions. I think everybody, like myself,
Stu, you have one on the Barn Swallow project. Who is managing the Barn Swallow project?
that was in the chat. Yeah, thank you. So that was coordinated by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I believe Kevin Cardinal's the immediate answer contact. And I won't put his email in the chat, but I can send that to you, Joe, unless Kevin's on here, which is completely possible as well. We're going to move on. We have 3 more presentations, and they are all, well, one's going to be live and then 2 videos. So up next, thank you very much, Arn. See ya. Next is Lisa Sorensen and Maya Wilson from Birds Caribbean. And the name kind of speaks for itself. So whenever you guys are ready, you're off to the races. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Stu. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Sorensen, Executive Director of Birds Caribbean. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to present today together with Maya Wilson, our project manager. I have to say it's really exciting and inspiring to see all the great work that's happening all across the hemisphere and in Europe and beyond. Incredible. So for the West Indies, some of you may not be that familiar with the Insular Caribbean or West Indies. The region is composed of several areas. There is the Lucayan Archipelago in the north, which includes the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos Islands. Then you have the large islands of Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. This makes up the Greater Antilles. And then there are a lot of smaller countries and islands that extend in an arc towards South America. And these are the Lesser Antilles. And we have Trinidad and Tobago and Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao further south, just north of Venezuela, South America, northern South America. We do include them as part of our territory, even though they're more similar to South America ornithologically and geologically. But since as islands, they face many of the same conservation issues and threats as the other islands, we do include them in our Birds Caribbean territory. All right, so Birds Caribbean is a regional nonprofit. We're dedicated to conserving birds, wild birds and nature throughout all the islands of the Caribbean. We are an amazing community of diverse people. Oh, go back. We have members from many different countries, cultures, nationalities, and backgrounds. All of us are drawn together by our love of birds and our dedication to learning about them and conserving them. So together with our partners, we do a lot of outreach and education. We work hard to engage local people of all ages in learning about birds and why it's important to protect them. We also promote science through our peer-reviewed journal, through our international conferences. We hold training workshops to build capacity, and we support research and mentor young scientists. And we undertake conservation actions. We organize campaigns to fight the constant and ongoing threats to birds and their habitats in the region. We fund projects to conserve endangered species, and we support conservation restoration actions by our wonderful partners. So we have a lot of regional conservation projects and programs like the Caribbean Waterbird Census and Mangrove and Wetland Education, Caribbean Birding Trail, and so forth. And I invite you to follow us on social media. So the Caribbean is a biodiversity hotspot. There are over 700 species of birds in the region, including a whopping 171 endemics. So we have trogons, toadies, hummingbirds, parrots, hawks, doves, and so much more. Unfortunately, many of them are globally threatened. And the Caribbean is also home to neotropical migrants. More than 120 species spend the winter in or migrate through the islands, including dozens of warblers and songbirds, as you see here. And the region is a stronghold for several at-risk species. It provides the only known wintering grounds for the globally threatened Kirtland's warbler in the Bahamas, and then the big-nosed thrush, mainly in Hispaniola. And it's also the main wintering area for a few different warblers. And so all of these species are dependent on the food, water, and shelter provided in the various habitats for up to 9 months out of the year. And the Caribbean is also an important wintering area for the near-threatened piping plover, with dozens or hundreds of birds wintering in Cuba, the Bahamas, and Turks and Caicos Islands. And I show here in the pictures just a small sample of some of the shorebirds that winter in or migrate through the islands. Many of these species have been declining for a number of years now, and we don't really know why. So our introduction to Modus started really when Pam Loring from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service kindly gave a workshop for us at our international conference in Guadeloupe in July 2019. And the workshop emphasized the enormous potential of Modus, both regionally and internationally. And it spurred a lot of interest in expanding the network into the islands. So as this Modus station location map shows, there's clearly a gap, small gap in the network in the Caribbean. In fact, there are currently no active Modus stations in the region. We're very excited to report that we just received our first grant for Modus from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NBCA program. And the goal of this project, this grant, is to increase capacity to monitor land birds in the Caribbean. And it includes funding for 5 Modus stations and about 20 tags for warblers. But in developing this project, it became clear that there was a lot of interest in expanding the Modus network in the Caribbean, well beyond what we have planned with our NBCA funding. And just a few months ago, we sent out a survey to our partners all around the region asking who would be interested to be involved, who perhaps knows of a good site to put a station, and we received back many enthusiastic responses. And so we decided to harness all of this excitement into what we are calling the Caribbean Modus Collaboration, or the CMC. And the goal of this collaboration is to bring together regional and international organizations that want to collaborate and expand the Modus network in the Caribbean. And so as a regional NGO with a large active network of partners, I think that Birds Caribbean is well positioned to help facilitate this effort and help all of our partners to get stations into important sites all around the region. So now I'm going to hand it off to Maya, and she'll finish telling you what's going on so far.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned before, there are currently no active Modus stations in the Caribbean. But as you can see from this all-time Modus station map, that hasn't always been the case. These stations in the Bahamas and Puerto Rico were put up by Pam Loring and colleagues at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as part of a large shorebird monitoring project. Now, unfortunately, all of these stations are no longer active, most of them due to damage by hurricanes. These stations in Barbados were put up by the Canadian Wildlife Service to monitor shorebird migration, but these stations have also not been active for the last couple of years. So as part of the Caribbean Modus collaboration, we will work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Canadian Wildlife Service to get these stations up and running again. Modus projects have also been conducted in Jamaica and the Bahamas by those at the Smithsonian and Georgetown University, Cornell University, as well as others at Ohio State and the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And these stations are also expected to be activated again because they are part of ongoing research in the region. The stations in Cat Island in the Bahamas are part of Nathan Cooper's work studying the Kirtland's warblers and the links between their non-breeding grounds in the Bahamas and their breeding grounds in Michigan in the US. The stations in Southwest Jamaica have been used to study the movements of several warbler species, including the American redstart, the ovenbird, and Swainson's warbler, and how events during the non-breeding season influence factors such as survival and reproductive success. And these stations, and hopefully lots of other stations that will be put up in Jamaica, will be used by Bryant Dossman and Alicia Brunner to continue their work. So we're very excited to work with all these researchers as part of the Caribbean Modus collaboration. So in addition to our funding from NMBCA, we have been overwhelmed by the support for the Caribbean Modus collaboration. As a small NGO, private donations are always an important component of program funding. And so we are so grateful to everyone that has contributed to the Modus collaboration so far. Special thanks to a couple of donors who made rather significant contributions. This year, our Global Big Day fundraiser raised money for the Caribbean Modus collaboration, and we raised nearly $20,000 from that fundraiser, so we're very excited about that. We've also, of course, had countless meetings with colleagues to develop this initiative, so thank you to everyone who has spent time and energy helping us. But we really would not be where we are today without those at the Northeast Modus collaboration. They have been so generous with their time and sharing their extensive knowledge about how to successfully get our program off the ground. So we just want to say, Lisa, Scott, Allison, Luke, John, others, thank you all for your help. And also a special thanks to Stu for his support of our initiative. So hopefully we'll all be installing stations in the Caribbean very soon. So although we are very new to Modus, with all the support, we think we are heading in the right direction to fill that geographical gap in the Modus network in the Caribbean. And we are working on selecting sites for the few stations that we already have funding for. With our NMBCA funding, we're going to start by putting up stations in the Bahamas, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. And we think with our additional funding from private donors and pending funding with partners like US Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, and the French government, that we'll probably be able to put up 10 to 15 stations in the next couple of years. But of course, the dream is to keep this momentum going and to eventually see something that looks like this, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years. Ideally, at least one station on one island in each country. But of course, we'll have to strategically prioritize sites based on several factors, including their importance to migratory and threatened species. We just wanted to say thank you to all who have shown support for this effort so far to expand Modus in the Caribbean. The slide that just popped away was only a partial list of all the partners, and we imagine that it will continue to grow. There has been so much enthusiasm, and we are so excited to work with all of you. Oh, sorry. Go back. So we want to say, yeah.
Go back to the logo slide for a minute.
Sure.
Went awfully fast.
Sorry, there is a bit of a delay. There we go. So yes, thank you to all of these partners, and we imagine that it'll get even more difficult to put everyone's logo on one page. So we just want to say thank you to Stu and Allison and everyone else who was involved in organizing this event and for inviting us to participate. We do want to say, feel free to reach out to either of us with questions or suggestions. If you're tuning in and are interested in getting involved by helping to sponsor a station, or if you have a great location to put a station, please let us know. And with that, I'll say thank you. And I don't know if we have any direct questions.
Thank you very much, Lisa and Maya. It's great and very exciting. You've certainly built up a lot of momentum. There wasn't any questions in the Q&A, but there was a good one in the chat that we can address that speaks to not just the Caribbean, but also Central America and South America. And that came from Greg, which was, what's the best way to help? Cash or equipment? And you feel free to chime in your answer. My answer is both, but it depends, obviously. And I think in addition to those, my feeling would be tags, which are equivalent to cash. But what comes with tags is the project and the research and the on the ground stuff, which gives us, which makes the stations worth their while immediately when you tag locally. So that's my perspective on that question, but feel free to chime in before we move on to the next.
Yeah, I agree. Cash and infrastructure tags, anything anybody has to donate would be most welcome. I think that, yeah, the local tags will really capture the imagination of people in the region, the local people, and get them excited about Modus. So we hope to raise more funding for more tags that we can tag locally as other people have been doing as well. I'm sure putting up the fence would be awesome too. To have a fence along the northern or southern side of every island would be awesome, but it would take a long time to get there. So in the meantime, we want to be strategic, work with our partners, figure out all the logistics of getting stuff to these islands. We have to deal with customs and shipping and all that other people have talked about. So we'll be working out all those details. But yeah, we would love to get research projects going as well and build capacity for that local research and that local excitement for Modus. And I think it'll be a really great tool for people to get inspired to conserve the habitats that they have for birds, because they'll see how, the research will reveal how important sites are in the Caribbean.
Excellent. We're a little bit behind. I'm just going to address one more question that came through, which was resilience to hurricanes. We've learned a lot of lessons in the past, and I think we can design very robust stations. And one suggestion here is the opposite, stations that could be deconstructed quickly. But although often in hurricane season, taking down the Motus station may not be your most immediate concern, but those are all things we need to consider. So lastly, thank you very much to both of you. Your contact information is there, and I look forward to carrying on with your work. So the last two presentations, first we're going to hear from Susan Heath from the Gulf Coast Bird Observatory, summarizing work throughout the Gulf of Mexico. So take it away, Allison. And thank you very much for everybody for hanging in there. This has been a marathon, but we've stayed over 200 till just very recently, which is fantastic.
Hi, this is Susan Heath. I'm the Director of Conservation Research at Gulf Coast Bird Observatory, and I'm going to give you an update on Gulf of Mexico Modus stations. So I'm going to start with Texas because that's where I am. We have 4 managerial entities in Texas that are managing stations, so they are listed there with the number of stations that each one is managing. The Gulf Coast Bird Observatory and Texas Mid-Coast National Wildlife Refuge have a joint project. So we have 15 towers total, but we have management of them divided between us. So that's the numbers that each one of us are managing. So we have 20 stations total in Texas, and there's a map that shows where they are. 5 of them are currently not functional, so there's 1 up by Galveston, 1 about the middle of the coast, and then the 3 south of Corpus Christi. The station up by Galveston has power issues, and we're going to put a solar panel on that to resolve that. The station that's in the middle of the coast was on a house, and it fell down in a high wind. So we're going to repair that when we upgrade all our stations, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the 3 stations south of Corpus are all down due to the remoteness of the area and some power issues and lack of people to maintain them. So the 15 stations that that GCBO and the Mid-Coast Refuge manage are all going to be upgraded to sensor stations by the end of 2021. And Houston Audubon is seeking funding to upgrade their 2 stations also to sensor stations. So hopefully soon 17 of our 20 stations will be have sensor stations on them. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Louisiana. These slides came from Robert Dobbs at LDMF. And you can see the 3 green circles are stations that have been functional, and the 3 yellow ones are ones that are newly restored, newly constructed or reconstructed. And then the 5 purple ones are ones that they plan to get operational by the end of the year. So they had some staffing reductions, which is hampering their ability to keep up with Modus, but they also have, everyone along the Gulf Coast has the same problem. These stations are very vulnerable along the coast to storms, and they used pop-up towers for a lot of theirs, and they're just not resilient enough to handle being on the coast. So they're going to move to more permanent structures, putting their towers on more permanent structures. And they're also going to shift them inland a little bit, so hopefully they won't have as many problems in the future. And there's Robert's information if you want to contact him. I have another slide at the end that has everybody's contact info on the Gulf Coast from Texas over to Florida. So you'll see that again. So I got this slide from Adam Smith. And this talks about Modus stations on wildlife refuges. So there's currently 7 Modus stations in Florida, from the Keys to the Tallahassee area. These all have sensor gnomes on them, but they're hoping to upgrade them to sensor stations. And then LDWF does operate 1 station on a refuge, which was included in the previous slides. So they're hoping to put up 3 to 5 more stations from Florida Panhandle to Louisiana over the next year or 2. One of those is approved in the Florida Panhandle, and then the other ones are to be determined. And there is Adam's email address if you have questions. So this slide shows all the points of contact that I just gave you information from. There's 3 of us in Texas, and Robert Dobbs in Louisiana, and then Adam Smith for the National Wildlife Refuges along the Gulf Coast. And that is all I have. So thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next presentation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Susan. I keep losing my chat, but in the Q&A, sorry, we had a little bit of maybe a glitch with the Q&A that may have not been working, but it seems to be okay now. There was a question with respect to connectivity and whether or not remote stations are operational or not. If stations are connected to the internet, you can get real-time updates, and sensor stations can connect through LTE or cellular modems, which allow real-time capability virtually anywhere. So there are a number of options that we can deploy now to actively monitor stations, and are making some upgrades to the website that make that easier as well. There's quite a lot of good chat going on. See you, David. And this is we have our last presentation is from Sydney Collette in Australia. And in Australia right now, it's about 4 or 5 in the morning. I don't think Sydney joined us. She joined us for a test meeting at 3 in the morning, which was just remarkable. So we're going to hand over this video, and then I'll wrap it up very briefly at the end. So.
Hi, my name is Sydney Collette. I'm a PhD student at Charles Darwin University in Northern Australia, and I am going to give an update on the Australasian Modus projects. So in this grouping, we've got 4 projects. We have the waders in Taiwan, finches in the Kimberley, bats in the Pilbara, and the shorebirds in New South Wales. So we'll start off with my project, which is looking at the finches in the Kimberleys. This is mostly an array around the Wyndham Township in Western Australia, and it's looking at the space use of carnivorous finches and looking at how space use aligns with habitat variables. So this project was active between 2018 and 2020, but has now finished. And it was an array consisting of 23 monopole antennas, which you can see there in the bottom right-hand image, which were listening for 168 tags across our 3 species. This project was funded by an Australian Research Council grant with multiple industry and government partners, including Charles Darwin University, Save the Gordian Fund, and the Department of Biodiversity Conservation and Attractions. Then if we take a left hook into bats, there is a group of array in the Pilbara region of Western Australia looking at several projects on bat species, and these projects are conducted by Biologic Environmental Survey. These are mostly investigating the species and movement habits of bats on mine sites and looking at the use and recolonisation of artificial caves to offset mining activities. This project is still ongoing, and they have 195 tags out on various bat species. But they're now moving towards other threatened ground-based species, such as the northern quoll. Funding for these projects have all come from the various mining companies on which these surveys are being conducted. So then if we go to the east coast of Australia and we look at the shorebirds in New South Wales, there is a small array just outside of Newcastle on the New South Wales east coast with the University of Newcastle researcher Dr. Andrew Griffin as the primary investigator on this project. They're mostly looking to quantify the movement of shorebirds within and between central New South Wales east coast estuaries. At the moment they have 3 receivers up and running with 19 active tags. And this project has been largely funded by various research grants. So then if we go up to Asia, we've got a project tracking the migration of shorebirds offshore in Taiwan. This project is led by Chungyu Chang from the Taiwan Wadar Study Group, and it was active from 2018 to 2020. They had 2 receivers active and 17 tags deployed. And this project was primarily funded by an offshore wind farm project. So extreme weather has been an issue that we've had to overcome, much like a lot of the other projects. We found that the Yagi antennas have been very easily damaged by strong winds, and considering that a lot of the projects are in areas that are frequently have cyclones and typhoons come through, it's not surprising that we've seen such damage. Additionally, the temperature has been a big hassle, particularly in the Western Australian projects. In these areas, it can easily and frequently gets to over 40 or 50 degrees Celsius, so that's sort of about 100 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we've had to introduce sort of heat sinks and insulation wraps to try to keep the radios cool enough. But this has also meant that in the Pilbara region, they've found that the CTT technology has worked better in these temperatures, so they're making a change for all of their sensor stations to become CTT sensor stations, and of course tags as well. Also, with the use of the monopole antennas, we've found it difficult to analyse the small scale movement because you need much more specific species. And so we've had to develop new centres of activity or species methodologies, and we've done that using maximum likelihood estimates and calibrating that with drones. Another hassle that we've had to look at has been the biggest hurdle for Taiwan, which was actually being able to set up receiver towers with electrical power. So this has meant that they've had to temporarily stop until they can find additional or alternative projects or locations. So these 4 projects are predominantly independent of each other. There's been a little bit of coordination within the Western Australian projects, but they primarily work independently within their area. And Australia is large enough and there are few enough projects that this has meant that there's generally no overlap in detections between receiver towers. And some projects have infrastructure that they're no longer using or needing, so they're looking for projects to donate them to, which is going to hopefully benefit the smaller projects that are wanting to start up, so that we can ideally have a nationwide Australian array. Not only for shorebirds, but also for those which migrate just within Australia. But ideally, we would like to get onto the East Asian Australasian Flyway and create an array there. So my project was originally meant to be on the East Asian Australasian Flyway, but we actually struggled to get funding because we couldn't prove that the technology would work under Australian conditions. So that's why we developed my much smaller scale PhD project in the Kimberleys. So ideally, we'd like to get back to this grand plan of developing a network along this flyway. And there are some beginnings of this with the Welter and Shorebird projects, but these are still fairly independent of each other. So that's the dream in the long term. But if you would like to get in touch with any of us, these are the main contacts for the projects. And thank you for listening.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Sid. I think we're wrapping up a little bit early. 3 hours is certainly a marathon. So thank you all for sticking with us. We will be following up. There's one question. Is Modus in Oceania? I'm not sure if I understand that correctly, but someone else, other panelists, feel free to chime in.
I think they're referring if there is Modus towers in Oceania, the continent, so Australia, New Zealand, and all the